The horse was worth far more than $50, but Jesse Holt was desperate enough to sell him for half his true value. Wyoming Territory in 1888 was a hard place for a young man with an old debt and no family left to help him. Jesse had only $11 in his pocket and 30 days before the bank could take the 40 acres that had once belonged to his father. The land was rough and dry, but Jesse would have fought anyone who tried to take it because it was the last thing his father had left him. His only chance was copper. Copper was a 6-year-old chestnut gelding with a white mark running down his face. He was strong and intelligent and stubborn enough to decide for himself which men deserved his trust. For 3 weeks Jesse had brought copper to the Clearwater trading post, hoping someone would pay the $50 he was asking. 2 men had tried to handle the horse and both had ended up in the dust. Jesse knew copper could bring much more money, but he did not have time to wait. Then on the final Saturday of September, a dark carriage stopped outside the trading post. A woman stepped down wearing a burgundy dress and black gloves. She looked at copper for several seconds before looking at the wooden board where the price was written. $50. She walked toward the horse and placed one gloved hand against his nose. Jesse held his breath. Copper stood perfectly still. The woman looked at Jesse. "I will pay $100, she said. Jesse thought he had heard wrong. "For the horse," she continued, "and another payment for the cowboy who knows him." Jesse asked her name. Diana Whitmore. She owned a large ranch 12 miles north. She offered Jesse a month of wages and asked him to bring copper on Monday. Jesse accepted. 2 days later, he arrived at the Whitmore Ranch and immediately understood that he had entered a world far different from his own. The ranch covered thousands of acres and employed more men than Jesse had ever worked beside. The head foreman, Miles Croft, greeted him with a cold expression. Jesse was given a place in the bunkhouse and told that he would report to Croft for ranch duties, but directly to Diana regarding the horses. That afternoon, Jesse met Diana in the stable. She was examining a young mare whose hoof had been recently treated by a local farrier. Jesse noticed something wrong. He checked the hoof and quietly told Diana that the problem had been missed. If they treated it now, the mare would recover quickly. If they waited, the injury could become serious. Diana studied him and asked him to inspect every horse in the stable. 2 hours later, Jesse had discovered 3 small problems that the previous farrier had failed to notice. Diana was impressed by his honesty. That evening, she invited him to supper. Their conversations became a regular part of the ranch routine. Jesse soon learned that Diana was not simply a wealthy ranch owner. She understood horses and business better than most men he had met. She had been running the ranch alone since her husband died 5 years earlier. During his second week, Jesse noticed something strange. The ranch records showed that 32 cattle had been sold at a Cheyenne auction while the ranch hands remembered 40. Jesse checked another transaction and found another difference, then another. The numbers were always smaller in the books than in the real sales. Jesse realized someone was stealing from Diana. He spent days checking records before finally deciding he had to tell her. That evening, he entered her study and explained everything. Diana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked how certain he was. Jesse showed her the auction records and explained that the missing money stretched back almost 2 years. Diana looked at the papers and quietly admitted that she had trusted the wrong man. She immediately decided to bring in an independent lawyer from Cheyenne. She warned Jesse not to let Miles Croft know what he had discovered. Jesse agreed. The next morning, Croft approached him in the stable and told him his employment would end before the month was finished. Jesse refused to accept the order without hearing it from Diana herself. Croft warned him that he should understand the difference between what was written on paper and what was practical. Jesse simply watched him walk away. He knew the man was frightened. That evening, Jesse found Diana in the garden and told her Croft might try something before the lawyer arrived. Diana asked what he would do if the ranch belonged to him. Jesse answered that he would stay close to what mattered most and never allow himself to be alone with someone he did not trust. Diana looked directly into his eyes. "Then stay close," she said. Jesse returned to the stable that night knowing the real danger had only begun. 3 days before the lawyer arrived, two valuable mares vanished. From the south pasture, and Miles Croft was the first man to report it. He claimed the pasture gate had been left open because of careless management. Jesse immediately knew that something was wrong. The gate had a heavy double latch that required deliberate movement. It could not simply open by itself. Jesse examined the ground and discovered faint tracks leading toward the creek. He followed them for 2 miles and found both mares standing inside a narrow canyon. Someone had placed a new rope across the entrance to keep them there. Jesse brought the horses back to the ranch but kept the rope hidden until he could show Diana. She studied it carefully and understood what Croft was trying to accomplish. He needed evidence that Jesse was careless with the animals so he could make the young cowboy responsible for the loss. Diana told Jesse that the lawyer would arrive on Thursday. Until then, she asked him to sleep in the tack room beside the stable. Jesse agreed. The room was small but safe and close to the horses. Diana began to trust him, more than she had trusted anyone in years. Their conversations became longer and their silences became comfortable. Jesse noticed that she often watched him when she thought he was not looking. He tried to ignore the feeling because he was only an employee and she was the owner of the largest ranch he had ever seen. Still, something between them had begun to change. On Thursday morning, the lawyer arrived. His name was Henry Henderson, and he had spent decades handling land disputes and financial crimes. Diana gave him the ranch records, and Jesse gave him the evidence he had collected. Tom, the head wrangler, also agreed to speak. He confirmed that several sales had been much larger than the amounts written in Croft's books. Henderson spent hours comparing the records. By afternoon, the truth was impossible to hide. Croft had been taking money from the ranch 4 years. The missing funds were too consistent to be accidents. When Croft entered the study, Henderson placed the evidence in front of him. Croft tried to explain the differences, but every excuse collapsed under another document. The lawyer gave him a choice. He could sign an agreement to repay what he had stolen and leave the ranch permanently or face a territorial court. Croft finally signed. When he walked through the stable to collect his belongings, he stopped beside Jesse. "You came here to sell a horse," he said. "This was never your world." Jesse looked at him calmly. "Maybe not the world I expected," he replied, "but I know when something is wrong." Croft left without another word. That evening, Diana found Jesse in the stable with Copper. She told him the danger was over. Jesse said he was glad. Then Diana reminded him that his original month of employment would end on Sunday. Jesse nodded. He expected to return to his 40 acres and the banknote waiting for him. Instead, Diana asked him to stay. Not as a hired hand, she said. Not because she needed someone to clean stalls. She wanted him to become part of the ranch permanently. Jesse was surprised. Diana explained that he had discovered in 2 weeks what she had failed to see for 2 years. More importantly, she had watched how he treated people and animals when no one was rewarding him. She knew he was honest. She knew he was brave. She knew he had stayed close when she was vulnerable. Jesse admitted that he had begun to care about her. Diana did not look away. She told him she had noticed his feelings long before he had found the courage to speak them. Jesse smiled for the first time that evening. He asked if she would allow him to court her properly. Diana smiled and said yes. She admitted that she had been considering the possibility since the day he told her the farrier was wrong about the mare. Jesse laughed because he remembered that day clearly. Copper suddenly turned his head toward them as if he had been listening. Diana laughed too. For the first time since her husband's death, the ranch felt like a home instead of a responsibility. But there was still one thing Jesse needed to do. He had to return to the bank and save his father's land. Before the note became due, Jesse rode back to Clearwater the following morning with Copper beside him and $100 in his coat pocket. The banknote had seemed impossible only weeks earlier, but now he had enough money to make the payment and protect his father's 40 acres. Diana had offered to help him pay the entire debt, but Jesse refused. He wanted to save the land himself. Diana respected that decision. Jesse reached the bank before noon and placed the money on the desk. The banker counted it carefully and extended the payment deadline. Jesse walked outside feeling as though a heavy chain had finally been removed from his shoulders. For the first time he understood that selling copper had not cost him his future, it had led him toward it. When Jesse returned to Whitmore Ranch, Diana was waiting near the stable. She asked about the land. Jesse smiled and told her that his father's 40 acres were safe. Diana hugged him without hesitation. Jesse stood still for a moment because he had never expected to feel that kind of warmth again. Copper watched them from his stall and gave a quiet snort. Diana laughed and said the horse appeared to approve. Over the next several months, Jesse became an important part of the ranch. He improved the stable system and trained the younger ranch hands. He helped Diana organize the books and discovered several smaller problems before they became serious. Tom respected him. The workers trusted him. Even Copper seemed happier than before. Diana and Jesse spent their evenings riding across the property and talking about the future. They knew the difference in their ages and social positions would cause gossip in town. Neither of them cared. Diana had spent too many years living according to other people's expectations. Jesse had spent too many years believing that his circumstances decided his worth. Together they learned that a person's value was not measured by money or land or family name. It was measured by character. One autumn afternoon, Jesse asked Diana if she still remembered the day she first saw Copper. She smiled and said she remembered everything. She remembered the price. She remembered Copper standing perfectly still beneath her hand. She remembered Jesse looking at her as if he could not understand why she wanted the horse. Then she told him the truth. She had not only wanted Copper. She had noticed the way Jesse watched the animal. She had seen that he was selling something he loved because he was willing to sacrifice for the land his father left him. That was the kind of man she had been looking for without knowing it. Jesse told her that he had noticed her too. He had seen a woman who looked powerful but carried loneliness behind her eyes. He wanted to make sure she never had to carry it alone again. They were married the following spring in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Tom stood as a witness. The ranch workers gathered outside the house and Copper remained near the stable as though he understood that something important was happening. Diana wore a dark green dress that matched her eyes. Jesse wore the best shirt he owned. There were no grand speeches and no expensive celebration. There was only a promise between two people who had unexpectedly found each other because of a horse that had once been offered for $50. Years later, people in the territory still remembered the story. Some said Diana had paid twice the asking price because she wanted the cowboy who came with the horse. Others said Copper had chosen both of them long before they understood what was happening. Jesse always laughed when he heard those stories. He knew the truth was simpler. A desperate young cowboy needed to sell a horse. A lonely ranch owner needed someone she could trust. A dishonest man tried to destroy what he could not control. And an animal with a stubborn heart brought two people together. Sometimes the thing we think we are losing is the very thing that leads us toward something better. Jesse thought he was selling Copper to save his father's land. Instead, Copper led him to a new home and the woman who would become his greatest companion. The lesson of their story is simple. Never judge a person by their wealth or position. True worth is revealed through honesty, courage, loyalty, and kindness. Sometimes one difficult decision can open a door to a future you never imagined. Sometimes the thing we think we are losing is actually the very thing leading us toward a better future. Jesse thought he was selling Copper to save his father's land, but instead, Copper led him to a new home and the woman who would become his greatest companion. The lesson of their story is simple. Never judge someone by their wealth or position because true worth is revealed through honesty, courage, loyalty, and kindness. If you enjoyed this Wild West story and want to hear more emotional stories from the American frontier, then subscribe to Wild West. Taylor's stories and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next one.